So what does all this mean for normal people in Georgian England, people who don't live in palaces? Well, if they were coming around and doing the tour with Mrs. Garnett, the housekeeper, and they could be going, I could get a bit of this at home. I fancy that wallpaper. I fancy those curtains. And it is true that designers like Robert Adam are now producing these catalogues. They include enormous, grand designs like whole houses or fishing pavilions. But if you didn't have that sort of money, you could get Adam's style through your clock or maybe a plaster decoration for your ceiling. So this is how aristocratic style filters down in Georgian England to the masses. It becomes mass market. And Adam and the other architects of the day, very interesting in that they create brands for themselves. They don't just produce buildings anymore. They produce entire idealistic interiors. They're the ideal homes of Georgian England.
And these ideal homes sparked off a revolution in decor. Between 1750 and 1850, Britain established itself not only as the leader of world trade, but as the manufacturing workshop of the world. Producing everything from cotton textiles and cheap china to cast iron fire surrounds and machine-made furniture, Britain's abundance of household goods would have a transformative effect on the living room.
If you think about a Victorian living room, what probably comes to mind is the stereotypical parlour crammed full of knickknacks. The word parlour is much older. It's a room that takes its name from the art of conversation, to parler in French. By the 19th century, though, these rooms were places of display for showing who you were through carefully selected ornaments, artworks, things. It's an age of mass production when you could express your personality through the things you had in your sitting room. And this was a new phenomenon because in the 16th century, art objects were the preserve of the very, very rich, like Bess of Hardwick. In the 18th century, we began to see taste appearing at a lower level in society. By the 19th century, it's almost a human right to express yourself through your consumer goods.
So to see how Georgian taste has turned into the Victorian passion for knickknacks, I've come to a small museum in London to meet its curator, David Milne, and to help him dust the myriad of objects filling every inch of the front room.
So, David, tell me about your ornaments here.
Well, we've got, as you can see, a great collection of everything made in 19th century industrial England.
So Victorian household advice is that it'll take a brisk girl 3 hours to dust the front room. Do you spend that long doing it?
No.
You're not a brisk girl, obviously.
No, I'm not.
An over-decorated parlour was a way of individualising your home among the identical suburban terraces being built all over the land. And period household manuals by gurus like Mrs. Panton offered endless advice on how to embellish your living room with Flemish cups, with royal memorabilia, fake singing birds, and Christmas scenes in glass jars. It's clear that there are now more possessions in one Victorian room than in the entire Tudor house.
So, David, come on, reveal the truth. Would you like to live in this room?
No.
Why not?
It's just too crazy, and you know, you spend too much time in this room and it kind of comes down on you.
It's oppressive, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's a little bit.
Yeah.
It's sinister.
Yeah, everything's dark and overpowering, and there are hundreds of things everywhere.
Now, not only was the parlour to be filled with one's best things, but it was also a sacred place to be reserved for one's best behaviour.
Ooh, this is very interesting. Mrs. Panton tells us that the Victorian parlour has a moral purpose in the household. She says that in here, fine manners are a necessity because this room holds our dearest treasures. You see little of the seamy side of life in here. She says that even when a husband and a wife are alone in the parlour, they've still got to behave well. No pipe, no slippers. And this will reinforce the mutual respect for each other that they have, she says. And this is a surer means of happiness than anything else she knows.
Alongside fine manners and fine things, the industrial age also saw the arrival of gas lighting. Discovered in the late 17th century as a byproduct of burning coal, it wasn't until the 19th century that gas was first used for lighting. Not in the home, though, but on London's streets. 1,600 working gas lights still exist in London today, so I've come to St John's Smith Square to meet Phil Banner, one of the last lamplighters left.
47 years of British gas.
42.
42?
Yes.
Oh, you're doing good.
Gaslighting was first demonstrated in London on Pall Mall by the German businessman Frederick Windsor in 1807, and it was such a sensation that people flocked to see it at work.
There it goes.
Hey,
Look at that.
very nice, isn't
That's
it?
a lovely golden glow, isn't it?
Very soothing, very soothing lights.
And what do you think people thought when this miraculous new light appeared?
It was received with mixed feelings. Some people thought it was a great invention,
Yeah.
but other people thought it was messing about with nature, because it should be light in the day
And dark at night, and this
yes,
is interfering
with nature. And
I suppose it interfered with certain people's business as well.
oh yes, yes. There's talk of the ladies of the night, shall we say. It was light in the areas they used to work, and they didn't.
They thought it was bad for business having too much light about the place.
Yes.
How many lamps then were there all over London?
At one time there was about 60,000.
And someone went round and turned them all on every night.
Yeah.
As evening fell, an army of lamplighters headed out to light every lamp by hand, with the same equipment as I'm using now.
How's this torch work?
This is the lamp lighter's torch, and if you push the lamp in through the bottom of the lamp and then
squeeze this
the bulb, yes.
Squeeze
you
it.
need to give it a good squeeze to get the air to go up through the pole to make the flame come out the top so you can light the lamp.
Come on, come on.
Almost.
Oh, come on.
Keep going. And on the light comes.
I have the magic touch.
You have the magic touch. Well done.
Thank you. Only 59,999 lamps to go.
That's right. It might take us all night. By the time we get to the last one, we'll be turning off the first one.
Oh, yeah, good point. Yeah, let's go on with it.
Let's carry on.
By the mid-19th century, a new network of gas pipes running directly into the house was supplying London's homes. The fireplace was still the centre of the parlour, but gas allowed householders to supplement their firelight, candles and oil lamps for the first time.
Illuminated air was what they called gas lighting when it first appeared in London. And you can see why it must be magical to see the air bursting into flame like that. This is quite an early gas fitting. The pipe goes straight into a naked flame. And it's a less friendly light, I think, than oil. It's a little colder. And it has many other disadvantages, although it's cheap and good. It's so bright, in fact, that when it first appeared, people thought that it would damage their optic nerves, and it could explode, and it was incredibly dirty, sooty stuff that sort of destroyed your living room. And that's one explanation for these deep Victorian colours that we get. 18th century bright light colours become rich reds and greens and things that just won't show the soot as much. And it also sucks oxygen out of the atmosphere. So when you hear about all these Victorian ladies fainting the whole time, yes, partly it was corsets, but it was partly because the oxygen from their room had been burnt by the gas lighting.
In comparison to the rushlights of the 16th century and the highly taxed candles of the Georgian drawing room, cheap gas would now flood the parlour with light and bring significant changes to how it was used.
Another huge transformation that gas lighting brought about was that it extended the length of people's evenings. Can you imagine what a change that must have been to be able to stay up late and have loads of light? My goodness. In fact, they had to invent new ways of passing the time, and household manuals now have chapters on topics like recreations for a long winter evening. And ladies are advised to make useful things out of fancy work that they can sell to each other at bazaars, like, ooh, I don't know, albums and poker work and collage-covered fire screens.
As the middle classes were filling their parlours with their mass-produced ornaments, an alternative movement soon emerged to build a very new or very old kind of house. This is Whittock Manor in Wolverhampton, and guiding me round is the writer Adrian Tinniswood.
Adrian, you could be forgiven for thinking that this house had been here since Tudor times, right?
It's a perfect piece of Merry England, isn't it? Just for a minute, it fools you, I think. But this was built in Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee. It's built in 1887.
Built by the industrialist Fyodor Mander, it's the ultimate house of the arts and crafts movement. Its followers rejected the ugly machine-made designs of the industrial age and urged a return to the handcrafted architectural glories of the past.
There's that wonderful irony that so many people of Mander's class had, that he's made his money from industry and now he rejects industry, he rejects the Industrial Revolution.
So this is Mr. Mander's drawing room. And what I think is fascinating about this house is the fact that we can pinpoint the exact moment at which Samuel Mander had the inspiration, can't we?
Exactly, yes. 1884, Wolverhampton, and a lecture on the House Beautiful by Oscar Wilde.
Railing against the vulgarity of the Victorian home, Oscar Wilde urged that taste should return to public life. Taking his cue from the designer William Morris, Wilde's House Beautiful didn't need a profusion of fake birds and glass jars, but instead just a few carefully chosen objects made by hand.
Well, I've got a lot of sympathy for his views, which are that things should be handcrafted, craftspeople should take pride in their labour, but ironically, all of his products were jolly expensive, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, that is the irony. You couldn't afford this kind of stuff if you were a labourer. Morris's crowd are socialists, and yet they're producing material that only rich people can afford.
But he never actually came here, did he?
No, Morris, although he was an interior decorator in the way that we would understand it, he also ran a very profitable mail-order business. So the Manders could just have ordered up textiles or chairs or carpets or whatever.
I find it quite extraordinary, really, that you could do that, and this whole House Beautiful concept is about putting a lot of thought and effort into your house, and yet you could get it through the post.
But the drawing room was not the only living room in the house, for the Victorian rich now had a multiplicity of living spaces to be used for different purposes by different members of the family at different times of day.
So this is living room-tastic, isn't it? What's that one?
There's the library.
Alongside the library were inglenooks for writing letters, morning rooms for reading the newspapers. There were games rooms for smoking and billiards.
It was a billiard room. This is where the men would have hung out.
And the largest room of all was the centrepiece of the house, the great parlour.
The quintessential late Victorian interior.
Yeah. It's not called the Great Hall, you call it the...
The Great Parlour. I mean, it's a big living hall. It's a sort of, an end-of-the-century living hall.
But it is modelled on Great Halls of medieval England.
Right,
it's the end of the road for the Great Hall, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's kind of... Or you can even argue it's the apotheosis of the Great Hall. It's a comfortable Great Hall, which is quite an achievement.
What's interesting is that now the living room has really... It's sort of come of age, if you like, because the Great Hall that we're in is only one of many different living rooms in this house, and the act of being in a living room has become specialised, hasn't it?
The guys hang out in the billiard room or the library, the women in the sort of the morning room or the drawing room. And this great parlour becomes a sort of a neutral zone. It becomes a sort of space where they can sort of spend time together.
Don't you think, though, that its chief function is, as we just did, coming into the house for us to say, wow.
Oh, yeah. It's a status claim apart from anything else. This is the room that you walk into and say, God, isn't this just beautiful? And, come on, isn't it? Isn't it? It just blows you away.
And it wasn't just the great halls of Victorian industrialists that harked back to the medieval age. At the back-to-backs in Birmingham, a series of 19th century workers' houses, whole families still played out their lives in one room.
It's a real extreme contrast. The aristocracy at this time have got more different types of living room than ever before or ever since, in fact. But at the same